Today we're going to cover the last section of Chapter 14, The Americans in Europe. The invasion of Italy. Hitler felt Italy had to be held. 1, the Allies would have air bases for planes to bomb Germany, and 2, the Allies could move into Germany and Austria from northern Italy. The Allied army that invades Italy will be a very international force. Many countries, plus small forces from other countries, will be part of it. Naturally led by the Americans. It had the segregated black division, the 92nd Infantry Division. The 92nd Infantry Division was actually the focus of a major motion picture that was released a number of years ago called Miracle at St. Anna. Also fighting with them were Japanese American divisions. Japanese Americans in the United States were interned in concentration camps because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And these soldiers, whose parents were still being interned in camps, agreed to fight in the United States Army as long as they were sent to Europe. There were British troops, and included among them was a Jewish regiment and an Arab regiment from Palestine, which is the current country of Israel. There were Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, Indians, South Africans, Free French, Greeks, Poles, Czechs, Belgians, Brazilians, and anti-fascist Italians. This was the force the Allies had to invade Italy with. Now, the Allies' 15th Army Group again has two main groups. The 5th Army replaces Patton's 7th Army. So we have the British 8th Army with General Montgomery and the U.S. 5th Army with General Mark Clark. Now we have the Allies' plan. 1, the British will land on the southern tip of Italy. 2, the Germans will be forced to move their troops south to defend southern Italy. And then 3, a week later, the major force lands further north at the city of Salerno, trapping the German troops in the south. Now on September 3rd, the British 8th Army, Montgomery's army, crosses from Messina in Sicily and lands on the southwestern tip of Italy. Montgomery didn't like the plan because he felt it left his army too far south, and he was right. There was almost no resistance. The Germans kept their troops further north. Kesselring felt the main invasion would be there, and he was right. British troops land in the Italian naval base of Taranto. Again, no resistance. Kesselring basically knew what the Allies were trying to do. On September 8th, the U.S. 5th Army, General Mark Clark's army, launches an amphibious invasion at Salerno. Salerno is about 35 miles south of Naples. This naval vessel you see here is called an LST, Landing Ship Tank. They were built that they can actually go up on the beach. The front of the bow of the ship would open up, a ramp would come out, and vehicles, tanks, jeeps, trucks, British Bren machine gun carriers that you see here, could then roll off. My uncle was an executive officer on board one of these ships during World War II and was at Salerno. This is LST 314. He was on LST 375. I can't find any pictures of his ship. Salerno is the furthest north the Allies could land and still have air cover. Now, due to the low number of American troops available in the European theater, the 5th Army was also made up of British troops. Kesselring correctly guessed the location, so the Germans were prepared. Here we see some German soldiers loading a 105 millimeter howitzer. Now, the Allies are unable to break out from the invasion area. The Germans contained the Fifth Army on the beachhead for over a week. Here we see American soldiers in a Sherman tank fighting through the streets of Salerno. Historians have blamed Clark for poor planning of the invasion. Clark was also slower and more cautious than Patton would have been. Clark blamed Montgomery's slowness in getting to him. Now, the British Eighth Army moves north 300 miles to Salerno. Here we see British soldiers moving around a burning German tank. On September 16th, the British and the Americans link up, and the Germans pull back to the Gustav Line north of Naples. On October 13th, the new Italian government declares war on Germany. It has little effect. Kesselring starts his defense of Italy. It's easy because of the natural geography. Italy is a peninsula and it's very mountainous. It's only 150 miles from sea to sea at its widest. Kesselring would do a great job. He led a very successful 20-month campaign of defense up the Italian peninsula. And because of this, Italy would become a slow war of attrition. Now, the Germans will stop the Allies at the Gustav Line for 4 months. The German 10th Army does a good job stopping the Allies, causing 40,000 Allied casualties. Here we see the positions. The British had invaded from the south. Kesselring did not pull back, so the Americans and British of the Fifth Army were held on the beaches. Eventually, they do link up with the British, forcing Kesselring to pull back and create a new defensive line between Naples and Rome. This was the Gustav Line. As you can see, between the two seas, he couldn't be flanked, and it would just be a matter of defending the mountains. Now, the Allies' plan to get behind the Gustav Line is to make an amphibious invasion north of the line and force the Germans to pull back. In January 22, 1944, the Allies launched an amphibious invasion behind the German lines at the Italian city of Anzio. Here we see the Italian peninsula, the American and British, and the German Gustav Line. Anzio is just south of Rome. So the Americans are going to land here, and their goal is to push behind the Gustav Line, forcing them to pull back. Some things never work as planned. 36,000 American and British troops, led by General John Lucas. The landings are a complete surprise to the Germans, who never expected a second amphibious invasion on the peninsula. Here we see the U.S. LSTs unloading troops and supplies into Anzio. You can see a lot of the shore bombardment has destroyed most of the buildings along the waterfront. Here we see American Sherman tanks coming out of the LST-77. But despite the surprise, the Allies couldn't break out from the invasion beach. The force is too small and didn't have very many tanks. The Allies were trapped on the beach for over 3 months. The Germans used to joke that it was the largest self-enclosed prisoner of war camp in Europe. Lucas was relieved of command for being too cautious and is replaced by General Lucien Truscott. In the middle of the Gustav Line, high up in the mountains, was the historic Monte Cassino Abbey. It was built back in the 6th century by Saint Benedict. In an attempt to break through the Gustav Line, Allied bombers destroyed the historic abbey. They think the Germans are using it, but they weren't. It has been rebuilt, as you can see today. Finally, on May 11th, Allied troops, mostly Polish and Free French, seize Monte Cassino, which is now just rubble, and they break through the German lines and force the Germans to fall back. Here we see a German mortar position firing back at the Allies. but the Allies managed to break through the German lines. Here they are. We see soldiers, Allied soldiers, climbing through the rubble of Monte Cassino. And the British here with a number of German prisoners. The Allies link up with the troops from Anzio. Here's the invasion. They break through the line, and they force Kesselring to pull back to another line that he's been working on. And the American troops enter Rome. Now, the Allies could have cut off the German 10th Army from retreating, but they didn't. Clark was obsessed with the capture of Rome and getting there before Montgomery did. This would increase Allied losses. On June 4th, the Allies enter Rome. Here we see the American Army with American Sherman tanks driving past the famous Roman Colosseum. Rome had been declared an open city by the German army, so there was no fighting. Kesselring falls back to a new defensive line 150 miles north of Rome. It was called the Trasimene Line. While he was defending the Gustav Line, he had engineers building a defensive line north of there, so he had someplace to fall back to. 2 days after the capture of Rome, the Allies launched their major invasion in Normandy called D-Day. After this, Italy becomes secondary as all focus is now in France. Allied troops were constantly being transferred from Italy to France. Through the summer of 1944, the Allies pushed their way north. They captured Florence in northern Italy in August. Now, the Arno River that runs through Florence has many bridges, and the Germans blew them up, so the Allies couldn't cross. But the only one they didn't blow up was the one right in the center there. That was the historic Ponte Vecchio. The German commander just couldn't destroy this old historic bridge. So what he did was he blew up the buildings on either side of the bridge so they would collapse and block the two entrances. After the loss of Florence, Kesselring pulls the German troops back to another line, a third defensive line called the Gothic Line. Now Kesselring stopped the Allies with the Gothic Line in northern Italy, and they hold the Germans for the next 7 months. Finally, in March of 1945, about the same time the Soviet army is circling Berlin, the Allies break through the Gothic Line, and they pushed into northern Italy. Here we see an American tank driving through one of these small Italian towns, giving rides to all the children. The German defense starts to collapse. On May 2nd, 1945, all of the German forces in Italy surrender. This was days after the Soviets captured Berlin and about 2 weeks after Hitler committed suicide. Well, this ends our section on the invasion of Italy and finishes chapter 14 on the Americans in Europe, North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. Well, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it and have a good day.